Judicial secrecy,
Okay.
that we can't.
You said that the night before, Madeleine and Sean had been very upset, and
I didn't say that actually.
What, that was in the statement, wasn't it? That was leaked out. Was that not the case? Was she not upset the night before and talked to you the night before?
She's gone. Madeleine's gone. The desperate screams of Kate McCann shattered the peaceful Portuguese evening at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. It was 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007, when Kate returned to check on her 3 children and found her eldest daughter's bed empty. The window was open, the shutter was up, and 3-year-old Madeleine McCann had vanished without a trace. In those first chaotic moments, as Kate's husband Gerry and their friends frantically searched the apartment complex, no one could have imagined this would become one of the most scrutinized missing persons cases in history. No one could have predicted that 16 years later, we'd still be asking questions about what really happened that night. But what if some of those questions have been deliberately left unanswered? What if crucial evidence about Gerry McCann has been systematically ignored by investigators? Tonight, we're diving into the shadows of this case that 3 separate national police forces have investigated, each reaching different conclusions. The Portuguese Polícia Judiciária initially led the investigation before controversially shelving it in 2008. Then came the British Metropolitan Police with Operation Grange in 2011, launched after direct intervention from then Prime Minister David Cameron. And finally, in 2020, German prosecutors made the stunning announcement that they had a prime suspect. But their investigation has taken yet another direction entirely. 3 countries, 3 investigations, and potentially 3 different approaches to evidence concerning Gerry McCann. Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button to join our community of true crime investigators. We don't just cover cases, we examine the evidence that mainstream media often overlooks. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just the disappearance of an innocent child. It's the web of political influence, media manipulation, and investigative contradictions that have surrounded it from day one. Tonight, we're examining newly compiled research that suggests evidence about Gerry McCann may have been systematically sidelined across multiple investigations, from cadaver dog alerts that were dismissed, to DNA evidence that was never fully analyzed, to political interventions at the highest levels. The pattern is disturbing and demands our attention. Where were you when you first heard about the Madeleine McCann case? For many of us, this story has been part of our consciousness for years, but tonight you might discover aspects of this case you've never heard before. The events of May 3, 2007 began like any other vacation day for the McCann family. Gerry and Kate, both doctors from Leicestershire, England, were enjoying a week-long holiday at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal, with their 3 children, Madeleine, nearly 4, and 2-year-old twins Sean and Amélie. They were vacationing with 7 friends, later dubbed the Tapas 9, who had all travelled together. That morning, the family attended a tennis lesson and then spent time at the resort's pool. According to statements, Madeleine asked her mother why she hadn't come to her room when she and her brother had cried the night before, a comment that would later fuel speculation about the children being left alone on previous nights. The last confirmed sighting of Madeleine by someone outside the family was at the resort's kids club at 5:30 p.m., when staff recorded her being picked up by her parents. At 8:30 p.m., Gerry and Kate put their 3 children to bed in apartment 5A, a ground-floor unit with a back entrance facing away from the resort's tapas restaurant where the adults planned to dine. The McCanns would later explain their childcare arrangement. The adults would take turns checking on all their sleeping children throughout the evening, despite the fact that the resort offered babysitting services. At 9:05 p.m., Gerry performed the first check, reporting that all 3 children were sleeping soundly. At 9:15 p.m., another member of their group, Jane Tanner, claimed she saw a man carrying a child near the McCann apartment, though this sighting would later be discounted by British police as an innocent tourist carrying his own child. At 9:30 p.m., another friend checked, but only listened at the door without entering. At 10:00 p.m., Kate McCann went to check on the children and discovered Madeleine missing. What followed was chaos. Kate's screams alerted the group, resort staff were notified, and a frantic search began. The Portuguese police, the Guarda Nacional Republicana, GNR, arrived at 11:10 p.m., a response time that would later be criticized. The initial investigation response revealed critical mistakes. The apartment wasn't properly secured as a crime scene, with dozens of people entering and contaminating potential evidence. Border alerts weren't issued until the following morning. The Portuguese Polícia Judiciária, PJ, didn't arrive until 1 a.m., and no house-to-house inquiries were conducted until the next day. Forensic technicians didn't fully process the scene until nearly 24 hours after Madeleine's disappearance. The media machine activated with unprecedented speed. By the following morning, Madeleine's face was on every Portuguese newspaper. Within days, it was a global story. The McCanns quickly established a media strategy, creating the Find Madeleine campaign and utilizing Gerry's brother John McCann's media connections. By May 14th, they had secured the services of former UK government media advisor Clarence Mitchell, who would become their full-time spokesman. The McCanns' behavior during these early days drew both sympathy and scrutiny. They appeared remarkably composed in front of cameras, something supporters attributed to their medical training and critics viewed with suspicion. They launched a relentless media campaign, traveling to multiple countries to keep Madeleine's case in the spotlight. Gerry maintained a detailed blog, and the couple met with figures ranging from the Pope to billionaire Richard Branson, who contributed to their rapidly growing fund. Before this tragedy, the McCanns presented as a typical upper-middle-class British family. Gerry was a cardiologist, Kate a general practitioner, who had reduced her hours to care for their children. They had struggled with fertility issues before conceiving Madeleine through IVF in 2003, followed by the twins in 2005. Friends described them as devoted, organized parents who maintained strict routines for their children. The family had moved to Leicestershire in 2005, where they quickly integrated into the local community. Madeleine attended a nursery where staff described her as bright and sociable. The McCanns were active in their local Catholic church and maintained a wide social circle, including the friends who accompanied them to Portugal. What's notable about the family dynamics before the incident is the apparent normality. No reports of dysfunction, no previous involvement with social services, no obvious red flags. This ordinary background would make the subsequent suspicion cast upon them all the more shocking, especially as Portuguese investigators began to question the parents' account of that fateful night. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann spawned 3 major investigations across 3 countries, each with different approaches, resources and conclusions. This fragmented international response has created a complex web of evidence, theories and potential oversights that continues to complicate the search for truth. The Portuguese Polícia Judiciária, PJ, led the initial investigation under the direction of Inspector Gonçalo Amaral. From the beginning, the investigation faced significant challenges. Portugal's missing persons protocols weren't designed for a case of this magnitude, and the resort town of Praia da Luz lacked the forensic resources needed for such a high-profile investigation. The PJ operated under Portugal's judicial secrecy laws, which prohibited them from sharing details of the investigation publicly, creating an information vacuum quickly filled by speculation and leaks. The early investigation focused on a possible abduction, with police conducting searches within a 15-mile radius of the resort. By May 15, 2007, local resident Robert Murat became the first official suspect, or arguido, after a British journalist reported his suspicious behavior. However, the investigation's direction shifted dramatically in July when British cadaver dogs were brought to Portugal. The specialized dogs alerted to the scent of human decomposition in the McCann's apartment rental car, which they had leased 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance, and on items belonging to Kate McCann. Forensic samples were sent to the UK's Forensic Science Service, but the results were inconclusive. detecting DNA that could potentially match Madeleine's, but was too degraded for definitive identification. On September 7, 2007, based on the dog alerts and forensic findings, Portuguese authorities named Gerry and Kate McCann as official suspects. This stunning development suggested the PJ was pursuing a theory that Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment and her parents had concealed her body. However, without conclusive forensic evidence, the case stalled. By July 2008, Portugal's Attorney General announced the investigation was being archived due to insufficient evidence. Inspector Amaral was removed from the case in October 2007 after criticizing British police involvement. He subsequently published a book titled The Truth of the Lie, which outlined his theory that Madeleine died in the apartment and the parents covered it up, triggering a years-long legal battle with the McCanns. The Portuguese investigation officially remained closed until 2013, when it was reopened based on new evidence uncovered by the British investigation. The PJ established a new team based in Porto, deliberately separate from the original investigators, to review the case with fresh eyes. Operation Grange, the British investigation, launched in May 2011 after direct intervention from Prime Minister David Cameron, following a personal appeal from the McCanns. Led by the Metropolitan Police, this review-turned investigation had unprecedented resources, eventually costing British taxpayers over $13 million. From the outset, Operation Grange's remit raised eyebrows. It was specifically tasked with investigating Madeleine's disappearance as if it had happened in the UK and treating the case as if she had been abducted. This narrow focus effectively eliminated the possibility of investigating parental involvement or an accidental death scenario, theories the Portuguese had considered viable. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, who initially led the investigation, famously stated they were working on the assumption that Madeleine was still alive. Operation Grange's most significant early contribution was discrediting the Jane Tanner sighting, identifying the man she saw as an innocent tourist carrying his own child. Instead, they highlighted another sighting by an Irish family who reported seeing a man carrying a child toward the beach around 10 p.m. The British investigation conducted new interviews, commissioned forensic analyses of phone records, and executed searches in Praia da Luz in 2014, but no breakthrough evidence emerged. By 2015, the Operation Grange team had been reduced from 29 officers to just 4, signaling a scaling back of the investigation. While never officially closing, the operation entered a more passive phase, primarily responding to leads rather than actively generating them. The third major chapter began in June 2020, when German prosecutors made the stunning announcement that they were investigating Christian Brückner, a German national and convicted sex offender, for Madeleine's murder. Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters stated they had concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead and that Brückner was responsible. The German investigation revealed that Brückner had lived in the Algarve between 1995 and 2007, including in a house just a few kilometers from the Ocean Club resort. Phone records placed him in Praia da Luz on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. German authorities also cited a prison informant who claimed Brückner had confessed to the crime, though this witness's credibility has been questioned. In 2023 and 2024, German authorities conducted searches at the Arade Reservoir in Portugal, an area Brückner allegedly referred to as his paradise. Despite these efforts, no charges have been filed against Brückner for Madeleine's disappearance, though he remains in prison in Germany for unrelated sexual offences. The relationships between these three investigations have been marked by both cooperation and conflict. The Portuguese and British teams established a joint investigation team in 2013, but tensions remained. Former PJ Inspector Amaral publicly criticised Operation Grange as a whitewash designed to exonerate the McCanns rather than find the truth. British authorities, meanwhile, expressed frustration with what they perceived as the Portuguese investigation's early missteps. The German announcement in 2020 caught both Portuguese and British authorities by surprise, suggesting a lack of coordination. While Portuguese and British officials publicly welcomed the German leads, Behind the scenes, there were reported disagreements about the strength of evidence against Brückner. These conflicts extended to evidence sharing. The Portuguese initially refused to release their full case files to British authorities, only relenting after diplomatic pressure. The Germans have been similarly protective of their evidence against Brückner, making vague public statements while withholding specific details from both the public and partner agencies. What do you think about how these international investigations handled the case? Did the involvement of 3 different countries help or hinder the search for Madeleine? And why might evidence concerning Gerry McCann have been treated differently across these investigations? At the heart of the Madeleine McCann case lies a complex web of forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and investigative findings, some of which point toward Gerry McCann, but were seemingly downplayed or dismissed. To understand why certain evidence might have been ignored, we need to examine the key pieces of the puzzle and how they were handled. The cadaver and blood detection dogs represent perhaps the most controversial evidence in the case. In July 2007, British police brought 2 specialized dogs to Portugal, Eddie, trained to alert to the scent of human cadavers, and Keeler, trained to detect human blood. These weren't ordinary police dogs. They were elite specialists with impressive track records, handled by Martin Grime, one of the UK's most experienced dog handlers. The results were striking. Eddie, the cadaver dog, alerted in 5 locations: behind the sofa in apartment 5A, in the McCann's bedroom closet, on the apartment's veranda, in the garden below the veranda, and in the McCann's rental car, which they had leased 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Keeler, the blood dog, alerted to the same spot behind the sofa and in the rental car's trunk. What makes these alerts particularly significant is their specificity. The dogs didn't alert in any of the other apartments or vehicles tested. Eddie only alerts to human cadavers, not living humans or animals, and only after death has occurred. According to handler Martin Grime, Eddie had never given a false positive in over 200 previous deployments. Most notably, both dogs alerted to items belonging specifically to Kate McCann, including a piece of clothing and a stuffed toy of Madeleine's that Kate had been carrying with her after the disappearance. The dogs did not alert to items belonging to the other children or to Gerry's possessions, raising questions about why Kate's items would contain these scents, but not Gerry's, despite them sharing the same spaces. The Portuguese investigators considered these alerts significant enough to name the McCanns as suspects. However, when Operation Grange launched in 2011, the dog evidence was effectively sidelined. Former Metropolitan Police Officer Mark Williams Thomas later claimed that Operation Grange's predetermined focus on abduction meant the dog evidence was never properly incorporated into the British investigation. Following the dog alerts, forensic samples were collected and sent to the UK's Forensic Science Service, FSS, for DNA analysis. The results, while not definitive, were intriguing. From the area behind the sofa where both dogs alerted, a sample was recovered that contained 15 out of 19 DNA markers matching Madeleine's profile. In the rental car, 15 out of 37 components matched Madeleine's DNA. FSS scientist John Lowe concluded these results were too complex for meaningful interpretation and could represent a mixture of DNA from multiple members of the McCann family. However, this analysis has been questioned by independent experts. Dr. Mark Perlin, creator of the True Allele DNA analysis system, publicly offered to reanalyze the raw data using his more advanced probabilistic genotyping software, claiming it could provide more definitive results than the methods available in 2007. Remarkably, this offer was never accepted by any of the 3 investigating agencies. Neither the Portuguese, British, nor German authorities pursued this potential avenue for clarification, despite Dr. Perlin's system being widely accepted in courts worldwide. This represents one of the most significant instances of potentially valuable evidence regarding Gerry McCann being overlooked. If you're finding this analysis valuable, please hit the like button. It helps others discover this important case review and ensures more people learn about these overlooked aspects of the investigation. Phone records and timeline inconsistencies present another area where evidence concerning Gerry McCann raises questions. Cell phone data obtained by Portuguese authorities showed unusual patterns in the days surrounding Madeleine's disappearance. According to police reports, Gerry's phone had been largely inactive in the days before May 3rd, but showed increased activity in the hours after Madeleine was reported missing. More significantly, there were discrepancies between the cell tower pings and the McCann's stated locations during critical time periods. Portuguese investigators noted that neither Kate nor Gerry's phones connected to the cell tower covering the Ocean Club during dinner on May 3rd, suggesting their phones may have been switched off or located elsewhere. When Operation Grange conducted its own analysis of phone records in 2013, they focused primarily on identifying unknown numbers in the Praia da Luz area, rather than re-examining the McCann's phone data. The German investigation similarly concentrated on Christian Brückner's phone records, effectively leaving the questions about the McCann's phone activity unaddressed. Timeline inconsistencies extend beyond phone records. The statements provided by the Tapas 9, the McCanns and their 7 friends, contained numerous contradictions about the evening's check-in schedule. Initial statements suggested the adults were checking on the children every 15-30 minutes, but later revisions extended this to 30-60 minutes. The precise timing of when each person visited which apartment changed across multiple statements. Gerry's timeline for the evening contains particularly notable discrepancies. In his first statement, he said he checked on the children at 9:05 p.m. and spent only a few minutes in the apartment. In later statements, this visit extended to nearly 10 minutes, during which he claimed to have used the bathroom. This change coincided with reports that another resort guest, Jeremy Wilkins, encountered Gerry outside the apartment around 9:15 p.m., a meeting neither man mentioned in their initial statements. Perhaps most significantly, Gerry's account of entering the apartment changed. Initially, he stated he entered through the locked front door using his key. Later, he claimed to have used the unlocked patio doors at the rear, the same entrance the abductor supposedly used. This change aligned the parents' stories, but contradicted his original statement. Operation Grange never publicly addressed these timeline inconsistencies. Instead, their 2013 reconstruction for the BBC's Crime Watch program presented a simplified version of events that omitted many of these contradictions. Witness statements from independent observers also contain elements that seem to have been minimized in later investigations. Staff at the Ocean Club reported that the McCann's dining reservation on May 3rd specifically requested a table with a view of the apartments, contradicting the impression that the checking system was a last-minute arrangement. Resort staff also noted that the McCanns had declined babysitting services, despite these being readily available. One of the most overlooked witness accounts came from Pamela Fenn, who lived in the apartment directly above 5A. She reported hearing a child crying in the McCann's apartment for over an hour on May 1st, 2 nights before the disappearance. This suggested the children had been left alone for extended periods on previous nights, contradicting the McCann's assertion that their checking system ensured the children were never alone for more than 30 minutes. Family members provided additional contradictory statements. Kate's mother, Susan Healy, told reporters that Gerry had called her the night of the disappearance, saying, "There's been a disaster. It's a disaster." This phrasing struck some investigators as unusual for describing an abduction. Meanwhile, Gerry's sister, Patricia, stated in an interview that Kate had checked on the children at 10:01 p.m. and the shutters had been broken open and they had gone into the room and taken Madeleine. This account of broken shutters was quickly abandoned when police confirmed the shutters were undamaged. These contradictions and inconsistencies in the evidence surrounding Gerry McCann were largely set aside when Operation Grange launched with its focus on abduction. The German investigation's fixation on Christian Brückner similarly bypassed these unresolved questions. What remains unclear is whether this represents a deliberate decision to ignore evidence concerning Gerry McCann, or simply the result of tunnel vision as each investigation pursued its preferred theory. The Madeleine McCann case stands apart from other missing persons investigations due to the unprecedented level of political involvement and media management that shaped its course. Understanding this influence is crucial to comprehending why certain evidence, particularly regarding Gerry McCann, might have been downplayed or ignored. Central to this narrative control was Clarence Mitchell, whose role evolved from government representative to the McCann's personal spokesman. Mitchell's involvement began just days after Madeleine's disappearance, when he was dispatched to Portugal by the UK Foreign Office as a media liaison. At the time, Mitchell held the position of Director of the Media Monitoring Unit at the Central Office of Information. Essentially, he was the British government's media crisis manager. What started as a temporary assignment quickly became permanent. By September 2007, Mitchell resigned from his government position to work exclusively for the McCanns, with his salary initially paid by wealthy benefactors, including Brian Kennedy, a Scottish businessman. Mitchell's transition from government representative to private spokesman raised questions about the boundaries between official UK involvement and private interests in the case. Mitchell's approach to media management was both sophisticated and aggressive. He established strict messaging protocols, arranged strategic interviews, and worked to counter negative narratives. When Portuguese authorities named the McCanns as suspects, Mitchell orchestrated a media blitz across British outlets, framing the development as a desperate move by incompetent foreign police. His background in government communications proved invaluable in shaping public perception. Perhaps most significantly, Mitchell maintained close relationships with British journalists, often providing off-the-record guidance on how stories should be framed. Former journalists have described a system where favourable outlets received information first, while those perceived as hostile faced exclusion or even legal threats. This created a media environment where challenging the abduction narrative carried professional risks for reporters. The UK government's involvement extended far beyond providing a spokesman. Within days of Madeleine's disappearance, then Prime Minister Tony Blair's office was directly involved in managing the diplomatic response. Ambassador John Buck was dispatched to the scene, and British police experts were quickly sent to Portugal, an unusual level of resource allocation for a missing person case abroad. When Gordon Brown became Prime Minister in June 2007, his involvement intensified. Brown spoke directly with Gerry McCann multiple times by phone and intervened with Portuguese authorities to allow the McCanns to meet with Pope Benedict XVI. Foreign Secretary David Miliband was similarly engaged, receiving regular briefings on the case. The most dramatic political intervention came in May 2011, when Prime Minister David Cameron ordered the Metropolitan Police to launch Operation Grange, following a personal appeal from the McCanns published in News International newspapers. This decision bypassed normal protocols for reviewing foreign cases and came with the highly unusual stipulation that the case be treated as if it had happened in the UK and as if it were a case of abduction. This political directive effectively established parameters that excluded consideration of scenarios where Gerry McCann might be implicated. Former Metropolitan Police officers have since questioned whether this political involvement compromised the investigation's independence and scope. The media narrative around the case evolved through distinct phases, each with implications for how evidence concerning Gerry was treated. The initial phase featured sympathetic, uncritical coverage presenting the McCanns as victims of both a predator and incompetent foreign police. British tabloids offered rewards for information and portrayed Portuguese investigators as bumbling and unprofessional. When Portuguese authorities named the McCanns as suspects in September 2007, the narrative briefly shifted, with some outlets publishing critical stories questioning the parents' account. This phase ended abruptly after the McCanns launched aggressive legal action against several newspapers, resulting in front-page apologies and substantial damages payments. These legal victories had a chilling effect on media coverage, establishing clear boundaries around what aspects of the case could be safely reported. The third phase, coinciding with Operation Grange, returned to the abduction narrative, but with a focus on various suspects rather than the McCanns themselves. This framing persisted through the German announcement about Christian Brückner, with most mainstream outlets accepting the premise that the case was exclusively about finding an abductor. Throughout these phases, certain aspects of Gerry McCann's involvement received minimal scrutiny. His changing timeline statements, phone records, and connections to individuals who assisted the family were rarely examined in mainstream British media. When Portuguese detective Gonçalo Amaral published his book outlining theories implicating the McCanns, British media largely portrayed it as a cruel attack rather than engaging with its evidential claims. This coordinated approach to narrative management raises important questions about whether political and media influences shaped not just public perception, but the actual investigative approach to evidence concerning Gerry McCann. Do you think media coverage helped or hindered this investigation? Was the extraordinary level of political involvement justified by the circumstances, or did it potentially compromise the search for truth? And how might these factors have affected the treatment of evidence regarding Gerry McCann specifically? Among the most compelling aspects of the Madeleine McCann case are the specific pieces of evidence that received inadequate investigation, particularly those that might have shed light on Gerry McCann's potential involvement. These overlooked elements represent critical gaps in the investigative record that deserve closer examination. Perhaps the most significant missed opportunity involves Dr. Mark Perlin's offer to analyze the DNA evidence using his true allele system. In 2018, Dr. Perlin publicly stated he could provide more definitive results from the same DNA samples that the UK's Forensic Science Service had deemed too complex for meaningful interpretation in 2007. This wasn't an empty claim. Perlin's probabilistic genotyping software represents a major advancement over the methods available when the original testing was conducted. True allele uses sophisticated algorithms to separate mixed DNA profiles and calculate statistical match probabilities, even with degraded or limited samples. By 2018, the system had been validated in numerous peer-reviewed studies and accepted in courts across multiple countries. Its ability to extract usable results from complex mixtures made it particularly well-suited for re-examining the critical samples from apartment 5A and the McCann's rental car. Dr. Perlin formally offered his services pro bono to Scotland Yard, the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária, and the McCann family's legal team. His proposal was straightforward. He requested access to the raw electronic data from the original DNA testing, not the physical samples themselves, which would allow his system to reanalyze the results without requiring new sample collection. Remarkably, none of the three parties accepted this offer. Scotland Yard never publicly acknowledged it. Portuguese authorities didn't respond. The McCann's representatives declined without explanation. This universal rejection of a cost-free opportunity to clarify crucial evidence raises serious questions about the commitment to following all investigative leads, particularly those that might implicate Gerry McCann. The DNA reanalysis represents just one of several investigative avenues that received limited follow-up. The cadaver dog alerts, despite their specificity, and the handler's impressive track record, were effectively dismissed after the inconclusive FSS results. Standard protocol in cases with cadaver dog alerts typically involves extensive forensic archaeology at the locations indicated. Yet no such follow-up occurred at the apartment or other alert locations. Financial records represent another area of limited investigation. While Portuguese authorities obtained some bank statements from the McCanns, they never conducted a comprehensive financial analysis. This gap is particularly notable given that financial motives or transactions often provide crucial evidence in cases where family members are suspected. Operation Grange similarly appears to have conducted minimal financial investigation, focusing instead on potential abductors. The rental car deserved more thorough examination beyond the DNA testing. The McCanns leased this Renault Scenic 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Both the cadaver and blood dogs alerted in its trunk. Witnesses reported the car's trunk was often left open at night, which the McCanns explained was to air out spilled food. However, forensic examination of the vehicle was limited to swabbing for DNA. No comprehensive analysis for trace evidence, fiber transfers, or chemical residues was ever documented. Medical records represent another investigative avenue that received minimal attention. As doctors themselves, both Kate and Gerry would have had knowledge of medications and their effects. Portuguese authorities requested Kate's medical records but never received complete documentation. Gerry's medical history was not thoroughly investigated by any of the three national agencies. This gap is notable given that accidental medication overdose was one theory considered by Portuguese investigators. This case has so many layers. If you have thoughts on this evidence, share them in the comments below. Do you think these investigative gaps were coincidental or part of a pattern? The McCann's wider circle of friends and associates also received limited scrutiny. While the Tapas 7, the friends dining with the McCanns that night, were interviewed, their statements contained numerous inconsistencies that were never fully resolved. David Payne, one of these friends, was the last person outside the McCann family to see Madeleine alive, visiting the apartment around 6:30 p.m. His account of this visit differed from Kate's, yet this discrepancy was never thoroughly investigated. More troublingly, Leicestershire police had received a report in May 2007 from a vacationing British family who had spent time with Payne and Gerry McCann on a previous holiday. They described witnessing disturbing behavior from Payne, including making inappropriate comments about children. This report was forwarded to Portuguese authorities, but apparently never integrated into their investigation. Operation Grange similarly appears not to have pursued this lead. The handling of digital evidence raises additional questions. The McCann's camera, containing photos from the vacation, was not seized until 5 days after Madeleine's disappearance, creating an opportunity for potential deletion of images. Forensic analysis of the McCann's computers was limited, with no documented attempt to recover deleted files or examine internet search history. In an era where digital forensics was already well established, this represents a significant investigative gap. The German investigation's intense focus on Christian Brückner since 2020 has further diverted attention from these unresolved questions about Gerry McCann. While German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters has made bold public statements claiming concrete evidence that Brückner killed Madeleine, no charges have been filed more than 3 years after their initial announcement. The Brückner investigation has notable weaknesses. The primary evidence appears to be cell phone data, placing him near the resort that night, though not specifically at apartment 5A, and alleged confessions to acquaintances. Confessions that emerged only after Brückner was publicly identified as a suspect and that some witnesses have since recanted. No physical evidence connecting Brückner to Madeleine has been publicly disclosed. What's particularly striking is how the German investigation has seemingly operated in isolation from the earlier Portuguese findings. There's no indication that German authorities have attempted to reconcile their Brückner theory with the cadaver dog alerts in locations connected to the McCanns, the DNA evidence, or the timeline inconsistencies in the Tapas 9 statements. Instead, they've pursued a single suspect theory that effectively renders all previous evidence irrelevant. This pattern of overlooked evidence and limited follow-up investigation creates a troubling picture. While any individual gap might be explained by resource constraints or investigative judgment, the consistent pattern of sidelining evidence that might implicate Gerry McCann across 3 national investigations suggests something more systematic. Whether this represents deliberate suppression, unconscious bias, or simply the path of least resistance is difficult to determine. What's clear is that a truly comprehensive investigation would have pursued these leads with the same vigor applied to the abduction theory, and that hasn't happened in the 16 years since Madeleine disappeared. As we approach the 17th anniversary of Madeleine McCann's disappearance, the case remains active but fragmented across 3 countries, with each investigation pursuing different theories and priorities. In May 2023, at the request of German authorities, Portuguese police conducted a major search operation at the Arada Reservoir, approximately 30 miles from Praia da Luz. This location was reportedly significant because Christian Brückner had referred to it as his paradise and frequented the area during his time in Portugal. The search involved divers, dogs, and ground-penetrating radar, but yielded no publicly disclosed evidence connecting to Madeleine. German prosecutors maintained that relevant clues were found, but have not elaborated on their nature or significance. In early 2024, German investigators conducted additional searches in Brückner's former residence in Hanover, Germany. These searches were reportedly connected to multiple cases, not exclusively the McCann investigation. Again, No definitive evidence regarding Madeleine has been publicly disclosed from these efforts. Meanwhile, Operation Grange continues to exist in a reduced capacity. The Metropolitan Police maintains a small team that reviews incoming information but conducts no active investigation. Their last significant operational activity was in 2014, when they conducted ground searches in Praia da Luz. The operation has cost British taxpayers over $13 million to date, with no clear resolution in sight. The Portuguese investigation technically remains open following its 2013 reactivation, but activity appears minimal. The PJ team in Porto occasionally reviews information shared by British or German authorities, but has not conducted independent investigative actions in recent years. The official positions of the three countries reveal the disjointed nature of the international response. German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters maintains that they have concrete evidence Madeleine is dead and that Christian Brückner is responsible. However, despite this confidence, they have not filed formal charges against Brückner for Madeleine's disappearance, citing ongoing investigation. British authorities through Operation Grange have never publicly endorsed the German theory about Brückner. Their official position remains that Madeleine was abducted by an unknown person and that they continue to treat it as a missing person case rather than a murder investigation. This subtle but significant difference highlights the lack of consensus even among allied nations. Portuguese authorities have maintained the most neutral stance, keeping their investigation open but making few public statements. They have cooperated with German requests for searches, but have not endorsed any particular theory of the case. The McCanns themselves continue to maintain that Madeleine was abducted and could still be alive. Through their spokesman, they have expressed cautious interest in the German investigation, but have not fully endorsed the conclusion that Madeleine is deceased. Despite nearly 17 years of investigation across 3 countries, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Why were the cadaver dog alerts in locations connected to the McCanns never adequately explained or investigated further? Why has no investigative agency accepted Dr. Perlin's offer to reanalyze the DNA evidence using more advanced technology? How do German authorities reconcile their Brückner theory with the forensic evidence found in the McCann's apartment and rental car? Why did Operation Grange exclude consideration of any scenario other than stranger abduction from the outset? What explains the numerous inconsistencies in the statements provided by the Tapas 9, and why were these contradictions never resolved? If Brückner is responsible, what was his motive, method of entry, and escape route that left no forensic traces? Why has there been such resistance to pursuing investigative avenues that might implicate Gerry McCann? These questions aren't merely academic. They represent critical gaps in our understanding of what happened to Madeleine McCann. The fact that they remain unaddressed after 3 national investigations and millions in resources suggests either investigative failure or, more troublingly, deliberate avoidance. This is one of the most complex cases we've covered. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our updates as new information emerges. The Madeleine McCann case continues to develop, and we'll be analyzing each new revelation with the same critical approach we've applied today. What piece of evidence do you think deserves more investigation? The DNA samples that were never reanalyzed, the cadaver dog alerts that were dismissed, the phone records with their unexplained patterns, or perhaps the political influences that shaped the investigation from the beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments below.